It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. An ongoing trend that I've seen recently revolves around sizing user stories and fitting user stories to fit in one sprint. And backlog refinement and grooming has been a topic for ages that people talk about. But the question at hand that I got from one of my students is, why are we so diligent about making sure that our items fit in a single sprint? Why does the size really make such a difference? And what I can tell you is there's a lot to this, there's a lot to unpack. So I want to give you the top 10 reasons why your story should fit into a single sprint. I thought that this would be a good way for you to kind of get your head around some of the thoughts that I've been thinking and some of the things that I jotted down as notes through conversations I was having when coaching. So, the first reason is that success is more probable. If you have small bite sized stories, your ability to complete them is going to increase. This is one of the simpler ones on the list. It's just pretty straightforward. You're more likely to be successful if your stories are small, because if they're small, they're well defined, and it's going to be easy for you to do. That's easier. All right. How about number two? Number two, planning becomes easier. So when you're trying to plan for the future, when you're trying to forecast, when you're trying to just plan for items that are going to be completed during your sprint, when you're trying to get your head around the scope of the work, if these things are smaller in size and they're independent following the invest model, you're going to find that it's easier to get your head around those and it's going to be easier to implement, and that these stories are just going to be far easier to consume. So remember, invest was independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, sized appropriately, and testable. This part where planning becomes easier is because the story was sized appropriately. Makes sense. How about number three? Risk management is easier. So anytime you're talking about taking on risk or moving faster, or we have outstanding dependencies, or trying to reduce dependencies and have cross-functional teams, or we're doing research to find out or validate a hypothesis, knowing that it could introduce risk, it makes it easier if everything is small. If you have these huge items and you have huge risk, it just makes it so much harder for people to manage and govern. So if you want your risk assessment and you want your risk to be more predictable and easier, if you're trying to reduce risk, you can manage risk much, much easier with small items than you can with large ones. All right, how about number four? Predictability is higher. It's just natural that a team, when they look at a large or an extra large item, are going to scratch their head and say, wow, that's going to be harder for us to get our head around than something that's small. So if you keep things small in size and have them fit in a single sprint, it's so much easier to be predictable. It's easier to get things measured. It's easier to be ready to go. Speaking of which, that's going to bring us to number five. You're able to adapt on the go. So this is kind of a bonus benefit, in my opinion, because sometimes you start working on something and you realize that you have to pivot or that you have to change or that the consumer's needs change or whatever the case may be. But adaptability is a very, very powerful tool. The problem is when a team doesn't have time to implement everything, it's easier for you to pick small stories and pull small stories in and adapt than it is for you to lean in on large stories or large backlog items and trying to break those into pieces and pull pieces in. So you want to make sure that you're better prepared. How about number six? Quality is higher. This is fact, fact, fact. What I can tell you is every time stories are small, I find that it's easier for us to do acceptance testing. It's easier for us to do unit testing. It's easier for us to do regression testing. It's easier to automate. Anytime stories are small, quality just naturally becomes higher. Seven, the product itself is better because now instead of worrying about these large scale items where things could potentially go wrong, you have a bunch of smaller items and it just makes the product better. It's easier to manage. It's easier to govern a definition of ready and a definition of done. It's easier to get things past almost done. And it's easier for you to control WIP and to make sure you're delivering value early and throughout the sprint. All right, next. It allows us, by having small stories, it allows us to maximize the amount of work not done. So if we look at this and we know we have an item that's huge, by breaking it down into multiple smaller things, we can identify pieces of parts that don't necessarily need to be done. So it's interesting to me because I think sometimes when we leave things too large, it leaves too much ambiguity on the table and too much room for people to interpret that extra work needs to be done. Where if you make things small, it maximizes and explains in detail what needs to be done and what can be left behind. How about our next one? Stakeholders are happier. When you have small things, the stakeholders can see the increment and they can see smaller bite sized deliverable, and they understand that it just makes sense for the product's real functionality to shine through, for people to be happier, and for the organization overall just to love and accept with a higher degree of satisfaction. It just makes everyone happier. And finally, the last one, it allows us to deliver working products and services more frequently. This one is one that people don't think about because if you do things in bite sized chunks, logic would be that's going to take a lot of smaller items to deliver one big thing. But the truth is, if you deliver things in bite sized chunks, just like we're describing, that you're going to be able to deliver a working product or service, a working prototype, a working proof of concept more quickly. And it's going to allow you to pivot, adjust, and really absorb all of the benefits of early sales, a faster time to market, of making your product more economically successful, of making your strategy better aligned. So there's just this innate ability to deliver faster and to deliver more frequent if the work is small. So there's a lot to unpack here. And what I can tell you is that by limiting your WIP and keeping your size of your items small, those two components are going to be the two keys to agile success. So I hope you enjoyed this top 10 list. It's a big one, it's a doozy, but I know that if you follow through and write these down, you'll be able to follow through and you'll be able to do these. But just keep in mind, if it's ever at all possible, make your items smaller, you won't regret it. That's going to do it for this episode. If you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out to us at learnmoreatagiledad.com, or we'd love to discuss the topic that you want. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care. We'll talk again soon.